When I was 3 months pregnant, the mother of the leukemia boy whose bone marrow I had donated to save his life came to find me. She knelt down in public and begged me to have an abortion and save her son once again. Child, you can have another baby, but if my son doesn't have the operation, he'll die soon. Can you bear to just stand by and watch him die? In my previous life, I gently refused as I touched my hard-won baby in my belly. Who would have thought that my husband would scold me for being so heartless? My mother had someone do the math, and it's a girl in your belly. How could you be so cruel as to let her son die just for a daughter? The two of them joined forces and sent me to the operating table to have an abortion and then performed a bone marrow puncture on me in a black hospital. After I regained consciousness, when I tried to escape from the hospital and call the police, I was pushed down the stairs by the boy I had saved. Before I died, I saw him throw himself into my husband's arms. Auntie, thank you for your bone marrow. It has made me fully recovered. Mom said that I'm a child and killing people isn't illegal. As long as you die, Mom and I can be with Dad openly and above board. This time, I smiled and nodded in agreement to have an abortion. My husband with hepatitis B, his mistress with AIDS, and their illegitimate son with leukemia. Their bone marrow should be donated to each other instead. When I saw Amber kneeling in front of me again, I felt a chill run down my spine. Being forced to have an abortion, being held down on the operating table and inhaling anesthetic, being pushed down the stairs by the little boy with a smile, and the most terrifying scene of those three people cuddling together. These images popped into my mind one after another, and finally, I came to a conclusion. My husband had already cheated on me long ago. The little boy whose bone marrow I had donated to save through the puncture was this scoundrel's illegitimate son. Emma, sister, please save my son one more time, okay? My son is still young. He's only 8 years old. He hasn't had a chance to grow up yet. My fist hanging by my side suddenly clenched tightly. But in my heart, I wished I could skin this couple alive immediately, yet on the surface, I still had to pretend to be extremely concerned. Just like in my previous life, Amber kowtowed to me again in front of everyone. Emma, I know you're a kind person. You donated bone marrow to my son once, but his condition hasn't been controlled. Please be a good Samaritan to the end. I'll do whatever you ask me to. Please, I'm begging you. Looking at the onlookers who were talking among themselves, I smiled quietly. She wanted to use public opinion to morally blackmail me. In this life, I won't be toyed with by them like I was in my previous life. I deliberately looked worriedly at the scoundrel Amber standing beside me. Honey, isn't this the mother of the little boy I donated bone marrow to last time? Your name is Amber, right? I remember that we haven't been in touch since the last operation. How did you find me? Amber subconsciously looked at my husband and then started kowtowing vigorously without saying a word. I really had no other choice. My son's condition has deteriorated sharply, so I had no choice but to find your contact information. Amber and I looked at each other, and the distress in his eyes didn't seem fake at all. Damn it. I was just wondering how such a cold person could be so empathetic about this matter. So it turns out that it's his own biological son. I forcibly suppressed the coldness in my eyes and shook my head with a look of pity. Saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Actually, I'm quite willing to help you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have volunteered to be a bone marrow donor. But unfortunately, my baby in my belly is already 3 months old. I really can't help you this time. As soon as these words came out, the onlookers were in an uproar. In my previous life, she also wanted to use public opinion to morally blackmail me. It just so happened that I was so angry at that time that I didn't even mention that I was pregnant. That's why I was coerced by her. Just like in my previous life, this woman was still persistent. I deliberately walked around her and tried to leave. In a hurry, the woman pitifully hugged my thigh. Don't go. My son is really waiting for you to save his life. I sighed and said, but I'm pregnant. That outrageous statement blurted out of her mouth. Child, you can have another baby, but if my son doesn't have the operation, he'll die soon. Can you bear to just stand by and watch him die? Haha, I was just waiting for her to say this. Without hesitation, I mustered all my strength and slapped her hard across the face. Your child's life is precious. Is my child's life worthless? Amber was caught off guard and was directly knocked over by me. Looking at the slap mark on her face, I coldly curled the corners of my mouth. Amber was stunned for a moment and almost couldn't control the anger on her face. Her first reaction was to try to help her up. I directly shouted angrily, go home. On the way back, while shaking my numb palm, I couldn't help but want to laugh. That old hag, that scumbag. Whether I want this child or not is my business. Why should they look down on it? As soon as we got home, Amber couldn't hold it in anymore. He slammed his cell phone down heavily. Emma, how could you hit someone today? I snorted coldly, what do you think? You know how hard it was for me to get pregnant. If you could do it, would I have had to endure the pain of in vitro fertilization? Amber's face suddenly changed. How could I not be able to? I looked at him indifferently. What? You can't even get it up. What? Amber gritted his teeth, and the veins on his forehead bulged with anger. After a long while, he finally choked out a sentence. My mother had someone do the math, and it's a girl in your belly. How could you be so cruel as to let someone else's son die just for a daughter? Hearing him say this so righteously, I really wanted to knock out his teeth and throw them into the cesspit. Since the mistress got slapped, I couldn't let him off easily either. I picked up the feather duster beside me and whipped it across his face. With a smack, a red mark was immediately left on Amber's face. Emma. Before he could fly into a rage, I took the initiative. Listen to what nonsense you're talking. Let's not talk about feudal superstition. The baby in my belly is yours. What does that child have to do with you? What? Is it your child, so you feel sorry for him? As soon as I finished speaking, his face changed drastically and then he looked guilty. Emma, you've misunderstood me. I was too lazy to listen to his so-called kind-hearted remarks and directly walked quickly back to my room and locked the door. Stay away from this kind of scumbag to stay safe. After protecting myself, I took a big gulp of water and sorted out my thoughts. In my previous life, I didn't know until after I died that Amber, that scoundrel, also matched the bone marrow type. But he mysteriously got hepatitis B this year, and on top of that, he didn't want to have the puncture himself, so he tried every means to push me out. To prevent the tragedy of my previous life from happening again, I will definitely agree to have an abortion. This child has Amber's bad traits and I don't plan to keep it either. But before that, this scumbag couple won't have an easy time either. What happened in the mall today was filmed and posted online. But the comments from netizens were a bit different from those in my previous life. The comments were seriously polarized, but this time, the person who was brutally cyberbullied was Amber. We can understand Amber's eagerness, but what does it mean that you can have another child, but my son will die if he's not saved? Wow, you even asked someone to have an abortion to save your son. Is your son some kind of divine bloodline that requires sacrificing someone else's child? As a mother herself, how could Amber say such a thing? Everyone is selfish. If you're allowed to be selfish, others should be allowed to be selfish too. Saving you once is already the utmost kindness. I smiled without saying a word and immediately hired a group of online trolls to smear Amber severely. I also found a group of people in real life. 500 yuan a day, and they took turns to send wreaths to Amber's son. The group online was paid 50 yuan a day, and they specialized in cursing people in the comment sections of various videos. I happily scrolled through the comment sections. Don't blame me for being cruel. Amber's child isn't a good person either. Since I've already died once, I won't show mercy just because he's a child. But soon, I came across a new comment. Haha, her family is like a brothel. You don't believe it. Some people even sent me private messages to scold me. This comment made me laugh. I knew Amber couldn't be faithful to just one person. Sure enough, there was something fishy going on. I quickly sent a private message to this netizen and chatted with him until midnight. And I also got an important piece of news. Stay away from Amber. She has AIDS. When I saw the words AIDS, my head buzzed. She's sick, so Amber definitely can't escape it either. I cursed and without hesitation made an appointment for a contagious disease test the next day. At the same time, I was so angry that I asked the online trolls to intensify their efforts. The child is innocent, but I'm talking about the child in my belly. The heart of this illegitimate child is as black as his parents. I still remember the scene after the operation when I was forced to accept the reality and took the recovered him out for a walk. Looking at the life I had saved bouncing around lively, even though I was sad for my own child, I was also relieved that he had finally fully recovered. But who would have thought that the little boy who was smiling at me 1 second would kick me down the stairs hard the next second? That smile still makes me shudder when I think about it now. That's not a child but a devil. Devils should stay in hell. On the first day the wreaths were sent, Amber's side completely broke down. Amber, who had been in a cold war with me, immediately came to me to break the ice. Honey, I was wrong last time, okay? Don't be angry anymore. Have you heard about what happened in the hospital? Those radical netizens actually sent wreaths to the child. This will cause too much harm to the child's mental health. I lifted my eyelids and glanced at him, and then said indifferently, oh. What can I do? Amber immediately got excited and took my hand and lowered his voice. Honey, that slap of yours really hit hard. The one who tied the bell to the tiger must untie it. The netizens are so angry because they're standing up for you. Only you can solve this matter. Actually, honey, I think that encountering such a thing in the early stage of pregnancy might be a sign that God doesn't want us to have this child. Saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Actually, we're also accumulating virtue for the baby in our belly. I disgustedly pulled my hand out, feeling extremely nauseated. In this life, he knows that being tough won't work, so he's trying to be soft? Seeing that I didn't say anything, he actually puckered his lips like a chrysanthemum and tried to kiss me. Kiss what? It's so unlucky. We're all adults. It's better to talk about something practical. I directly took a step back and said bluntly, I can help her, but I don't trust you now. Let me see your cell phone. Amber's smile froze on his face. I looked at him with a cold smile. The illegitimate son is already so old. He doesn't know how much money he spent on the mistress over the years. If I don't ruin him in this life, I'll have lived in vain. After he dies, his property will all be mine, and that sickly illegitimate son won't be a threat at all. What I need to do now is to get back all the money he spent on the mistress. I snatched Amber's cell phone. He didn't want to let me see it, but he didn't dare to speak loudly as I held his weakness. However, he's really a born cheater. He even knows to use Huawei with a dual system. I directly asked him to find the hidden system, and easily found the evidence of his cheating. What's this? Amber was so anxious that he stammered, Emma, let me explain. To prevent him from getting angry and hitting me, I directly called the police. The evidence of his cheating was conclusive and I was still pregnant. The police had been in constant communication with me on the phone since they received the call. Amber had no chance to make a move several times. Finally, he couldn't help but get angry out of embarrassment. What on earth do you want? After the police arrived, I stated my request. I demand to get back all the expenses that he spent on the mistress during our marriage and ask the mistress to kowtow and apologize to me in person. Amber got anxious as soon as he heard this. Even for the sake of his illegitimate son, he couldn't expose the identity of the mistress. Emma, which man hasn't made mistakes? Can't you just let it go? You're still pregnant. Can't we just live a good life for the sake of the child? I directly retorted, is this how you want to live a good life? Secondly, didn't you want me to have an abortion to save someone else's son? Fine, I want a divorce and an abortion. As soon as he heard the word abortion, Amber's eyes lit up a little. I lowered my eyes and cursed in my heart. Damn bastard, a monster in human skin. The police's persuasion was in vain and at my request, they took us to the Civil Affairs Bureau together. After coming out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I coldly gave the final ultimatum. I'll have someone calculate the expenses that you spent on the mistress over the years. If you don't pay back the money, I'll use legal means. By then, how big the mess will be beyond my control. Amber looked extremely worried. He couldn't be happier to divorce me and have me abort the child. But getting back the marital property really gave him a headache. I had someone calculate the assets. In the past 7 years, he had spent a total of 1.38 million yuan on the mistress and the illegitimate son. When I learned this number, my hands were shaking with anger. Amber only had a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan. Where did he get so much money to support the mistress? It's all my money. While warning Amber, I started the lawsuit process. If I can't get the money back, the law will take care of the mistress for me. Amber broke down and cursed me for being ruthless. I know why he said that. The illness of the illegitimate son is like a bottomless pit, and Amber can't afford the money, so this money can only be found by Amber. But where does he have the money? The next day, after I came back from the hospital, Amber's mother came directly to my house. Remembering all the things she did in my previous life, I didn't even want to look at her with half an eye. Why are you here? She didn't have any good intentions in the first place. As soon as the door opened, she sat on the ground and wailed loudly. Everyone, come out and have a look. My daughter-in-law is abusing her mother-in-law. Poor me, an old woman. I have to sell my house to give her money when I'm old. Young people nowadays really want to skin us old people alive and suck our blood. I hardly ever come to visit, and my daughter-in-law won't even let me in the door. With her crying like this, all the neighbors on the left and right came out. Everyone pointed at me and said, you can't behave like this. Elderly people nowadays are not easy either. That's your husband's biological mother. If you're not filial to her, you'll be punished in the future. I sneered and took out the loudspeaker that I had prepared long ago. Her son had an affair during the marriage and had a 7-year-old illegitimate son with his mistress. He spent 1.38 million yuan on the mistress's family in the past few years. I'm just getting back this property. Her son had an affair during the marriage. This sentence was played in a loop in the corridor. When the old hag heard this, she immediately got angry. She rolled on the ground and got up, and without saying a word, she came to snatch my loudspeaker. But with her breaking down like this, she couldn't hold back what was on her mind. You barren old hen. It serves you right that my son cheated on you. It's your fault that you can't get pregnant. You bastard with no mother to raise you. Why don't you die with the bastard in your belly? You can still donate your bone marrow to save a few people. I snorted coldly, you old scourge are still alive and well. Don't worry. I'm sure I'll outlive you. After saying that, taking advantage of my height, I placed the loudspeaker on the rack that I had placed at the door in advance and set it to play on a loop. That old hag tried to reach it but couldn't. The neighbors who had just spoken up for her immediately became extremely disgusted with her. When she wanted to borrow a chair to stand on to reach the loudspeaker, no one would let her enter their homes. She was so angry that she started yelling and cursing at my door. I ignored her and hurriedly went downstairs, took a taxi, and went to her village. In my previous life, I had always been thin-skinned and couldn't bear to lose face. Only after living this life again did I realize that things like face and dignity aren't that important after all. The Amber family has a bad family style, but they always like to pretend to be wealthy and powerful in the village. I decided to pay them back in their own coin and went directly to the busy places in their village and made a scene, telling all the shameful deeds that Amber had done. I even printed out his glorious deeds on A4 paper and widely publicized them in the village. By the time Amber heard the news and rushed over, I had already taken a taxi and left. There was nothing he could do. Now that he didn't dare to expose the identity of his mistress, he could only bite the bullet and pay me back the money himself. But unfortunately, he didn't have any money, and his mother was reluctant to sell the house. Since that was the case, I could only reluctantly help them. The results of the AIDS test came out soon. My test result was negative, and I had to thank that useless Amber for that. However, I heard that the old hag was so angry that she was hospitalized. Amber even called me to curse me out because of this, but I just felt a sense of satisfaction when I heard it. Serves you right. I had been married to him for 10 years, and that old hag had never given me a good look. Not to mention that after I died in my previous life, she even asked Amber to scatter my ashes into the stinking ditch and cursed me that I would never be reincarnated. This time, when I heard that she was hospitalized, I directly bought a string of firecrackers and set them off. Probably seeing that I was unyielding, Amber soon gave up struggling. Divorce is divorce. It's normal for a vicious woman like you to be abandoned. I was really blind to marry you, I said indifferently. Oh, pay me back the money, or I'll sue you. Amber immediately softened. Half a month later, 1.38 million yuan indeed arrived in our joint account. As the party at fault, he could only get less than 1/3 of the property, and the house was bought by me before marriage. All in all, he only got 200,000 yuan. How long can 200,000 yuan support a child with leukemia? Moreover, Amber had erectile dysfunction, and it was extremely difficult for him to have another child. This child was their lifeblood. Sure enough, they started a crowdfunding campaign on Drops of Water. Less than a week later, Amber even shamelessly sent it to me. Please help me. Have pity on the child. I was so angry that I laughed. How could a person be so shameless? Seeing her constantly begging, I suddenly felt playful and started chatting with her. I deliberately said, alas, I'm getting divorced, and I'm afraid I won't be able to keep my child. As soon as I said this, Amber immediately sent a video call. If you can't keep your child, can you consider saving my son? Please save him. My son and I have depended on each other for so many years. I can't lose him. I showed a look of distress on my face and deliberately asked, where's your husband? Doesn't the child have a father? Before Amber could say anything, I preempted her and said, oh, I got it. Did he cheat on you like my husband? I can't accept men who cheat and their mistresses the most. They will all get their comeuppance, suffer a painful death, and never be reincarnated, right? With every word I said, the mistress's face turned paler. Finally, she was forced to grit her teeth and nod, yes, they all deserve to die. I smiled contentedly and then heard Amber say, Emma, this matter is really important. Can we talk about it face to face? I'll treat you to dinner. Please save my son. Looking at the glint in her eyes, I just smiled. Okay, Amber, but I'm busy recently. Let's meet in 3 days. Amber had tricked me so badly in my previous life. This time, let her taste the consequences of her own actions. Treat the illegitimate child as your lifeblood? Then I'll destroy your lifeblood. In my previous life, the hospital that performed the operation on me when I was unconscious was a black-hearted hospital. It was a place where money could make everything work, so I went there, fully armed, to find the doctor. To make it look more convincing, I burst into tears as soon as I saw him. Doctor, please save my child. You must save my Oliver. I was testing him with my words. Unexpectedly, the doctor said directly, oh, didn't I already promise you to do the operation? As long as you bring the person with a successful match, I can start at any time. I pretended to wipe my tears, but actually, I was covering the corners of my mouth that couldn't help rising. Since they had paid before, I could save some money. Doctor, actually, there's another person with a successful match. As I spoke, I directly showed the doctor another matching report. Doctor, my child's father also has a successful match, but he? I hesitated to continue, and the doctor naturally understood what I meant. He doesn't want to? I nodded. Yes, my child's condition can't wait any longer. The woman we wanted to ask for bone marrow donation before can't be persuaded to come for a while. I wonder if it's okay to let my husband donate bone marrow to my son directly? But this matter still needs your help to hide it. Otherwise, I'm afraid my husband will resist, and it will be difficult to extract the bone marrow. After saying that, I took out a thin stack of money from the thick stack of RMB I had prepared. Please, doctor. The doctor smiled and pushed up the glasses on the bridge of his nose. It's all for the children. We understand a mother's painstaking efforts. I smiled from the bottom of my heart. This is the advantage of a black-hearted hospital. Money can make the mayor go. Who cares about conscience or not? In this life, everyone will get the punishment they deserve. Including these so-called doctors. The day before the dinner, I went to check Amber's Drops of Water crowdfunding page. Although netizens had cursed her because of the previous incident, they still felt sorry for the child after all. In just 2 days, they had already raised 100,000 yuan. Before they could withdraw the money, I wrote a long paragraph accusing Amber of being a mistress and interfering in other people's marriages. She was selling her misfortunes online to win sympathy, but in fact, she had cars and houses under her name but didn't sell them. I sent it with a small account, and the netizens exploded. Damn it, Amber. You have cars and houses but are reluctant to sell them. You come to the internet to beg. I even donated 300 yuan that I earned from delivering food yesterday. Give it back to me. Yeah, she's a mistress who destroys other people's families. Let's forget it. Exactly. Who knows if this is her comeuppance? Folks, let's not interfere in other people's karma. For a while, everyone was shouting to get their money back. And the smile on my lips couldn't be controlled. I still felt it wasn't satisfying enough, so I deliberately went to the hospital where they were and took a stroll around. Many netizens rushed over to ask for their money back. Amber and the mistress were surrounded by the crowd, and both of them were so worried that frown lines appeared on their foreheads. I watched calmly from outside the crowd. Amber had a guilty conscience. Even without evidence, she didn't dare to jump out and refute. Especially when her son was about to have an operation, she didn't dare to provoke me at all. The hard-earned life-saving money finally had to be returned with gritted teeth. There was nothing she could do. Compared to the money, she needed my bone marrow more. Unfortunately, she was doomed to achieve nothing. The money from the Drops of Water crowdfunding disappeared like a bubble. On the third day, the dinner finally began. Because the truth about the three of us hadn't been exposed yet, Amber couldn't show up this time. To set a trap for them, I deliberately held back my disgust and called him. The mother of the child with leukemia wants to invite me to dinner. I don't have any other relatives or friends here. Can you come with me? I'm afraid of being plotted against. If you don't want to, it's okay. I won't force you. Amber agreed immediately and couldn't wait. At noon that day when he followed me to the appointment, the mistress's expression was rather meow, but soon she regained her anxious look. Sister, you can order whatever you want to eat. I gave her a meaningful look and deliberately put on a stern face. Amber, I'm really disappointed in you. I'm already a victim of a failed marriage. I hate mistresses and cheating men so much, and you happen to be a mistress. How do you expect me to accept you? I spoke neither too loudly nor too softly, but it was loud enough for the people around to hear. Everyone turned to look over, and Amber immediately looked embarrassed and covered her face, then tried to pull me into the private room. Sister, I admit it's my fault. I shouldn't. She glanced at Amber, destroy other people's families. But the child is really innocent. Please save him. I'll let him recognize you as his godmother in the future, okay? I wrinkled my nose in disgust. It seemed that this woman thought I was a fool. So I gave 2 awkward laughs and waved my hand. Haha, forget it. Your child is also an illegitimate child, right? Illegitimate children can't see the light of day. Amber's face turned ugly for a moment, and Amber beside her even tried to defend her. Emma. Today we're here to talk about the important matter. Why are you talking about these irrelevant things? I looked at him and then stared at Amber and sighed. Let's eat first. In my previous life, I had a meal with them, and when I woke up after that, I was already on the operating table. This time, they still wanted to use the same trick, but little did they know that I had already got the antidote from the black-hearted doctor in advance. Doctors like that have no bottom line. As long as they get enough money, it's not uncommon for them to use a living person's heart for transplantation. Not to mention this kind of knockout drug. During the meal, the two of them kept staring at me to see my condition. Estimating that it was about time, I just lay on the table like I did in my previous life. Amber pushed me and saw that I didn't move, so he threw his chopsticks on the ground. Damn bitch. If it weren't for my son, I wouldn't humble myself to beg you. Amber kissed her on the face. Baby, bear with it for a while. After she has the operation, we'll find a way to get rid of her. Anyway, we haven't got the divorce certificate yet. If she dies, all her property will be mine. My money will be yours and our son's too. I sneered and secretly opened my eyes a little. Coincidentally, Amber had his back to me. I was steady, accurate, and ruthless. I directly covered Amber's nose and mouth with a handkerchief soaked with the knockout drug. By the time they realized what was happening, Amber was already lying on the ground. Amber stared at me in shock. You? How? I smiled slightly and directly held my breath and shook the handkerchief in front of her. I specifically asked the doctor for a dose of the drug for a pig. After knocking these two people out, I first turned off the timed alarm on my phone. Then I called the black-hearted doctor and directly took Amber to the hospital. Doctor, you must save my son. The doctor looked at me and said, I'm retired from a top-tier hospital. I looked at them eagerly until the door of the operating room closed. I wondered what Amber's reaction would be when he woke up. Amber had AIDS. Judging from the transmission routes of AIDS, Amber couldn't escape no matter what. Whether it was these doctors or his illegitimate son, none of them could escape. An hour later, Amber's phone suddenly rang. Looking at the caller ID, my heart started beating faster uncontrollably and the blood in my veins seemed to boil. Hello? Amber's panicked voice came from the other end. Emma, where did you take Amber? Why is his phone in your hand? Looking at the still lit up operating room, I smiled and asked rhetorically, may I ask why your note for my husband and his phone is, baby? Amber was silent for a moment and then it was as if he had nothing to lose. You already knew, didn't you? Since that's the case, may I ask why your note for my husband and his phone is, baby? Amber was silent for a moment and then it was as if he had nothing to lose. You already knew, didn't you? Since that's the case, hurry up and come here. The operation will be finished soon. Your precious son will be able to come out bouncing around soon. As soon as I said this, the person on the other end screamed. What? Amber is donating bone marrow to my son. I just smiled without saying a word. Judging from her reaction, she should have known that Amber had been infected with AIDS by her. Amber rushed over in more than 10 minutes. She ran towards the operating room like a madwoman. Coincidentally, the light in the operating room went out. Amber and the illegitimate son were pushed out together. The doctor came out and announced the good news. Congratulations. The operation was very successful. Amber's legs gave way and she sat on the ground directly. I just smiled. Now this is what a family of 3 should look like. If you're sick, you should all be sick together. Who? Who allowed you to let him donate bone marrow? Who allowed it? Who allowed it? The doctor was stunned by her yelling and kept looking back and forth between me and Amber. Wasn't it the child's mother who requested it? Amber grabbed the doctor's collar. Open your dog eyes and see clearly. I'm the child's mother. I've never made such a request. Why are you doctors so irresponsible? Don't you need to screen for infectious diseases before an operation? This was not a proper hospital in the first place and the doctor didn't care about medical disputes. Cut, didn't you know the standards of our place before you came? Still want to screen for infectious diseases? You should go to a top-tier hospital. The doctor pushed Amber away with a disdainful look on his face. Tisk tisk, how rude. So I couldn't help but kindly remind them. Doctor, but she just said that this man has AIDS. As soon as these words came out, everyone was stunned. All of them stiffened and looked at me. You? What did you say? I pretended to be innocent, I only knew that he had hepatitis B. I really heard about the AIDS for the first time. The doctor didn't even have time to settle scores with me and immediately went to find a way to block the transmission. But the operation had been going on for so long. It was probably too late to block it now. In the huge hospital, Amber and the unconscious illegitimate son were left at the door of the operating room. Amber looked at her son, and tears fell down one by one. At the same time, she vented all her anger on me. You wicked bitch. My son hasn't recovered because you refused to donate bone marrow. Why do you want to make him get AIDS now? He's so young. He's only 8 years old. I was amused by this absurd theory. Don't forget that your son is still alive because I donated bone marrow once. Besides, isn't it your fault that your son got AIDS? Amber couldn't argue with me and wanted to hit me, but she had just regained consciousness and her fists landed on me feebly with no power at all. Instead, I slapped her so hard that she spun around twice. You deserve it, sister. Who asked you to be a mistress? Amber originally wanted to fight back but the illegitimate son lying on the hospital bed suddenly started having convulsions. Amber was so scared that she burst into tears and ran around shouting for doctors, but in this black-hearted hospital, no one paid any attention to her at all. Pardon. Mom will take you to another hospital. Hold on. Ambulance, could you please take me there? Please, this is a hospital. Aren't you doctors who save lives? I watched coldly. The real doctors who save lives wouldn't work in a place like this. Amber was forced to have no choice. She pushed the hospital bed of the illegitimate son and ran out. Out of curiosity, I also followed to have a look. She looked so terrifying that even some kind-hearted passers-by who wanted to help were scared away. The illegitimate son's convulsions became more and more severe. Amber could only push him and run wildly on the street to the hospital. But the more impatient she was, the more mistakes she made. When crossing the road, she didn't pay attention and was hit and sent flying by a car coming from a distance. The illegitimate son was thrown out a long way along with the bed. Amber was also hit and fell to the ground spitting blood on the spot. She tried hard to look in the direction of the illegitimate son. Her lips moved twice and then she stopped moving completely. She didn't even close her eyes until the end. The mother and son died on the spot. I calmly withdrew my gaze. I silently recited, as the saying goes, what goes around comes around. When Amber woke up and saw me sitting beside his bed, he was obviously stunned for a moment. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but he didn't dare to say them. So I broke the silence first. Your son is dead, and Amber, that precious one of yours, is also dead. Amber frowned and struggled to sit up from the bed. What did you do to them? I don't believe it. I looked at him leisurely. Amber, you haven't had a physical examination for so many years, have you? He looked at me blankly, looking stupid. Do you know that you have AIDS? Amber was stunned, but soon he laughed again. Stop talking nonsense here. You found out that I cheated, right? So you're deliberately scaring me here. When I looked at him, a bit of pity unconsciously showed in my eyes. Too lazy to waste words, I directly took out the doctor's diagnosis result and showed it to him. HIV positive, multiple tumors in the body have worsened. Don't you feel uncomfortable in your body? His hand loosened, and the test sheet floated directly to the ground. Amber seemed to have a hard time accepting this fact and wanted to find a doctor to explain it to him, but after walking around the hospital, everyone avoided him. I kindly reminded him. You have AIDS. Everyone is keeping their distance from you. Amber suddenly knelt on the ground and then covered his stomach and vomited violently. I shook my head with a cold smile. He didn't have much time left. In Amber's situation, the hospital wouldn't take him in anymore. During this period, he tried to go home many times, but I drove him out every time. Finally, he had no choice but to live in a rented house by himself and depend on his mother. Unfortunately, his mother was an uneducated, stubborn, and loudmouthed woman. She even went around spreading that I had a bad character. My son just has AIDS. With such advanced technology nowadays, it's not a big deal at all. That heartless woman drove my son out. She's really cruel. Who can help me teach her a lesson? As soon as these remarks came out, the mother and son were directly isolated by everyone. I sold my house and car and went on a trip with a large sum of savings in hand. It was already half a month later when I came back. When I went to see Amber, he was lying there, breathing weakly. He looked haggard. When he saw me, he could only gasp for breath. I clicked my tongue and deliberately touched my belly and sighed. I came here today to tell you something. I don't know who your mother asked to do the fortune-telling at that time. The baby in my belly is actually a boy, and he's very healthy. Amber's dull eyes lit up for a moment. But then I changed the topic. Unfortunately, your family's bloodline is too inferior. Besides, you cherished your illegitimate son so much. You probably wouldn't like my child either. So I've already had an abortion. As soon as he heard the word abortion, Amber's breathing became even faster. He tried his best to stretch out his hand towards me. His whole face was strained. He was still quite tenacious. I looked at him with a smile and dealt the final blow. Do you know that Amber had other men besides you? She got AIDS from other men and then infected you. Unfortunately, the mother and son are already dead. There's no way to verify whether that illegitimate son is really your son. Amber's eyes widened. He let out a grunt and then died. A trace of sarcasm flashed in my eyes. I turned around and walked out. Not far away, Amber's old mother was still rummaging through trash in the garbage can. I put on my sunglasses and walked out against the wind. Those who do many unjust deeds will surely bring doom upon themselves. They can only blame themselves. Before leaving here, I made a phone call to report that black-hearted hospital. Buying and selling organs, trafficking knockout drugs. None of those who had made dirty money in it could escape.